Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Meanwhile Here on Earth. This program features in-depth conversations with the leading names in the subjects of UFOs, abductees, the paranormal, panel discussions, and the very best and brightest of the next generation of writers and researchers. Meanwhile Here on Earth, the show breaking new ground in alternative talk with your intrepid host, veteran investigative writer and researcher, Peter Robbins.
Hi there, and welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth with me, Peter Robbins. You are watching or listening on KGRA, that is KGRA Digital Broadcasting, kgradb.com. You can subscribe to KGRA or this show, and if you use my name, Peter, as your subscription code, you will receive a 30% discount. That's by month or by the year. You can also listen to past shows at Spreaker.com. This is a special show for a number of reasons. First, it's the 4th of July. And I hope you and your families are all having a spectacular 4th of July at that. My guest and I have pre-recorded this show about a week and a half ago because it's the 4th of July and we have other things to do. It's also a very big weekend in a city in New Mexico called Roswell. This is the long 4-day weekend that happens every year, whereby the huge conference and festival that has made that city partially famous takes place. And this year, it is in fact the 75th anniversary of the event. It's also the 75th anniversary as of Friday a week ago, just Friday, the 24th of June, of the Kenneth Arnold UFO sightings in Washington State. These two events kicked off what we call our modern age of UFOs. So it's particularly auspicious for me to be broadcasting today and to have a very special guest who, in the best way that social networking works over the past years, has become a good and true friend, and somebody who has been on the show before as a panelist, but this is his first time on as the dedicated guest. Reverend Michael J. Carter is originally from Baltimore, Maryland. He moved to New York City in 1980 and lived there for 27 years, working as a professional actor before moving to Asheville, Carolina with his family. Michael is an ordained interfaith minister and received his BA degree in letters from the College of New Rochelle, where he graduated cum laude. He received his Masters of Divinity Degree from Union Theological Seminary in New York City, class of 2000, while serving various Unitarian Universalist congregations in New York. Michael was trained as an anti-racism trainer and has been recognized by President Clinton for his efforts. Reverend Carter now serves as the minister for Unitarian Universalist congregation of the Swannanoa Valley in the beautiful mountains of western North Carolina. Reverend Carter has written articles on UFOs and religion for such publications as UFO Magazine, Alien Encounters, that's in Britain, and the MUFON UFO Journal. He has spoken at UFO conferences such as the Edgar Cayce ARE, Ancient Mysteries Conference, Contact in the Desert, and the International UFO Conference in Scottsdale, Arizona. Reverend Carter has also appeared on Japanese television discussing the Bible and UFOs. A longtime UFO experiencer himself, sorry, I just lost my place there. Yes, he lectures extensively on the topic of religion, spirituality, and UFOs. He has appeared on the Sci-Fi channel's Steven Spielberg production of Abduction Diaries, The Real 4400, and is a frequent guest consultant on the History Channel's production of Ancient Aliens, as well as UFOs, The Hidden Evidence, which currently airs on the Travel Channel. Michael has also been interviewed by Academy Award-winning actress Shirley MacLaine, George Norrie on Coast to Coast AM, Beyond Belief on Gaia TV, and Late Night in the Desert with Heather Wade. Reverend Carter's books are entitled Alien Scriptures, Extraterrestrials in the Holy Bible, A New World If You Can Take It, God, Extraterrestrials, and the Evolution of Human Consciousness, God Consciousness, a 30-day meditation manual to God-centered thinking and the metaphysics of spiritual healing and the power of affirmative prayer. His latest book, Initiation, The Spiritual Transformation of the Experiencer, was published in August of last year. All 5 books can be found on Amazon.com and at Barnes & Noble. And Reverend Michael J. Carter, welcome to Meanwhile.
Peter, finally, but all good things come to those who wait. It's a pleasure to be here. It's good to see you.
It's good to see you, my friend. And through the mysteries of time and space, happy 4th of July. I hope you and your family are having a wonderful day today, which isn't actually today, but in the future.
Yes, that's right. No, it's a break time for me. I have a birthday coming up in July 9th. And, I'm learning to let life come to me a little bit, which is a big deal for me. But so I'm learning to relax at 65.
Excellent. In the spirit that I love to pursue this show in, we're going to begin with some questions that I've asked myself since childhood about people in public life. How did they begin? How did they become the people they became? And it doesn't matter what they became well-known, famous, or highly regarded for. For me, understanding at least some of that journey before venturing into their work and what you're doing now. And, you and I could probably fill many 2-hour periods of time.
Yes,
this being
sir.
the first, hopefully, of a good number to come.
Yes.
So let me start at the beginning with you. You were born in Baltimore. Can you tell us a little about your family?
Yeah, I was born in Baltimore to my mom's name is Rosetta, and my stepdad raised me. His name is William. Just came back from Baltimore, got back Sunday, Allegiant Thursday through Sunday. And they worked for the government. My dad was a supervisor of telecommunications. My mom was a stenographer. My dad served in the Air Force and the military, my mom in the Army. We grew up, we grew up in a religious home. Not oppressively so, but religion played a big part. I was raised Baptist, man, and but I think they did the best job they could, and I think I turned out pretty well. My dad is 90. We just turned 90, and my mom is 87. She's a 2-time cancer survivor, and they're really dear people. We've had our ups and downs as parents and children do, but I'm lucky to still have them.
Do you have any siblings?
Yes, my brother Kevin. Well, he would actually be my stepbrother. He was murdered in Baltimore back in 1995, and but from my biological dad, who I didn't meet until I was 16, and we were very close up until the time of his death. He had a son and 2 daughters from his marriage, and so I'm very close with them. We talk on the phone frequently. When I'm in New York, they live on Staten Island, and so I'm the oldest out of all of them, and so that's my family per se.
This is a question I normally wouldn't ask a guest, but I have so few African American guests that what do you know about tracing your family to America? Is that something you've explored with your family or on your own?
I have, Peter. That's a great question. I did the 23andMe, but I forgot, I did one of those where you swab, another one. But I was trying to trace it from my dad's side, my biological father's side. We have a lot of Cherokee and obviously a lot of European blood. My dad, his father was half white and half African American with some natives there, some Cherokee, and his father was white, and his great grandfather was a guy by the name of Henry Clay Bullock. They came here from England, had lots and lots of land in the eastern part of North Carolina, and he had his wife from Europe, but he had two mistresses, one African and one native. And obviously, no TV, no streaming, prolific baby maker. And so when I used to go to family reunions, there were people there who looked like you. There were people there who looked like me with blue eyes, some gray eyes, some. It was like we were all hybrids, which we are anyway, in a
Yes.
way. And so, we're all mutts, but it was beautiful. But when
Yeah.
my dad died, and we kind of went back to our corners, not in a combative way, but that was the event. Those were the events that brought us together.
If you don't mind my asking,
Yeah.
Sometimes the events in our lives that help us or forge us into being the people that we are,
Yeah.
Are very positive. Other times they're tragic. How old were you when your brother was murdered?
Oh God, Peter, this was July 15th, 1995. So I guess I was in my 40s, my 30s then. I'm not good at math, but if you do the math, he was born August 2nd, 1960. He was killed in a robbery. Um, I don't know what he did was to make extra money in New York. We would call them the gypsy cab drivers, right?
Ah,
But they called them hacks in
right,
Baltimore. And so he was making extra money, but you use your own car,
right.
picking up people at Lexington Market,
Sure.
and he picked up the wrong person, and they shot him in the head 5 times, took his money, and poof.
Did they ever catch the
No,
man who did it? Yeah.
no. As a matter of fact, it was really tacky, for lack of a better word. When my brother got shot, he fell forward in the car, and he was killed in East Baltimore, and so it was row houses, and his car went up on a curb and cracked one of the steps to this row house. They had the gall to try to get my family to pay for it. Yes, I'm telling you. Obviously, we didn't. I mean, you got to be kidding me.
I,
But yeah,
were you already were you a professional actor at the time, or were you involved in ministry?
Yes, I had my feet in both worlds. I was in New York. I had stopped going to auditions and stuff, but I would do a lot of background work, on the soaps, on the New York soaps, on some of the some industrial film. I did principal work there, principal work on some soaps as well, but on films and stuff like that. I get it's not huge, but I get a pension from AFTRA, uh, the American Federation of Television and Radio Actors, starting in August. But I was a member of Equity, SAG, and AFTRA. Yeah.
Growing up, at a certain point, we master reading, and you go from
Love
see
it.
Dick and Jane run to the world of books. Were you much of a reader as a boy?
Oh, voracious. Same now. I got that from my mom. My stepdad was he's a numbers person. I can barely balance my checkbook. But oh, really? I'm not joking. I'm glad there's a calculator on my
Right there
phone.
with you.
Yes, I'm not ashamed. Uh, I love to read. It took me to just different places. I'm an introvert, believe it or not, by nature. I'm an INFJ on Myers-Briggs. I did it 3 times. first time I was ENFJ, just that close to I. But as I kind of got to know who I was really, and by that, I go to church, being an actor, you're in front of crowds, but I like the way they frame it.
Yeah.
It's where you get your energy.
Yeah.
And I get recharged by being alone. And most of my friends happen to be extroverts. COVID for me, aside from some friends of mine being ill, I have not gotten it. It wasn't as bad. It wasn't as bad for me because I didn't mind being alone.
I know.
You know,
I can understand
yeah,
that. I
I
think
did
I'd have
not
the
mind.
same. Yeah.
Yes,
Was there any particular genre of books that you were drawn to, or kind of a generalist and all over the place?
well, I'll put it to you like this: I just started reading science fiction about 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago. Just started watching it about 4 years ago. I like detective stories. I liked history, and of course, going into the ministry, a lot of the books that I had to read when I went to Union and I did my undergraduate work at College New Rochelle, they were already on my bookshelf. So I already had a jump on it. Now it's dry. I don't look at, I love psychology. I love history. I like religion. Um, I'm not a very religious person, which is probably why I fit in with the Unitarians so well. But I love religion for what it can be,
Yeah.
but for now, it seems to be used to keep us divided.
In many respects.
And it always has to some
Yeah.
degree, but now it's really it's enough is enough.
Michael, although I'm best known for my work in the field of UFO studies, I began my career in the fine arts, but have been a film maniac since I was very young. I love the world of film and
Yeah,
movies,
yeah,
and I could have easily gone into that as a profession. I also love the theater,
yeah. Me
and
too.
the world of actors and acting has not only fascinated me since I was a kid, but I was lucky enough to work for years in off-Broadway theater management with some of the
Yeah.
finest actors, certainly in the country over the years. Um, was the thing that brought you into a consciousness of that this might be something you wanted to do through watching actors in movies, or did you have a chance to see much theater, live acting as a young person?
Not as a young person, even though I did do a lot of community theater in Baltimore. There was a theater troupe called the Arena Players. And these are beautiful questions. Peter, I always knew that I was going to be a clergy person. The word I was a priest. And then later in life, I said, well, maybe I'll become a secular priest. I wanted to be a therapist because therapy had helped me so much
Yes.
in my life. Um, but, uh, someone told me I had talent. I auditioned for the Arena Players. Um, I got accepted. I was an understudy in a play called The Amorous Flea, a comedy based on Moliere's School for Wives. Hilarious. We wore like the little powdered wigs. I had a little ponytail, like I have now. I have my hair in a ponytail now. But a guy got sick. His name was Ken. Really handsome brother, leading man, little Clark Gable mustache, my height, very cafe au lait colored man. He got sick. I went on. I got a standing ovation. I said, I want to do this.
What a feeling, right?
Yeah. I went to Towson State University. They had a very good theater department there in Baltimore. My dad, my biological dad, remember I told you I didn't meet him until I was 16. He lived in New York, so I had a place to stay. He lived on Governor's Island.
Oh boy.
He was one of the first African American warrant officers in the Coast Guard. So I
Wow.
went to New York, wound up studying with Win Handman, Michael Beckett. I was at, oh God, it was down in the Village.
Not Circle in the Square.
No, was another one. Anyway, that's why I got most of my training there. Studied with Wynn at the American Place Theater, who I loved, and we just had a love affair uh, as far as I was concerned. And he saw things in me. And wound up being on scholarship at Dance Theater of Harlem, Alvin Ailey, studied with Phil Black, tapping it.
Boy.
And I just did some uh, musicals off Broadway, summer stock. How I made my living was soaps. I didn't have dreadlocks at the time, and my hair was kind of like this, maybe a little longer, not as much silver, kind of leading manish, kind of. And they used me. Sometimes I would do day player, under 5 work, extra work, ABC, All My Children, Another World, One Life Lived.
Terrific.
Yeah.
That does pay the bills. So
It did. I had health insurance.
Michael, you are an experiencer. You are somebody who has had a life in this 3-dimensional, regular workaday world, and in the world that so many friends and colleagues also inhabit, of non-standard reality.
Yeah.
When did that begin for you?
Okay.
As well as you can recall.
Well, okay. The first encounter I had as an adult was December 28th, 1989, coming back from the pyramids in Chichen Itza and Tulum.
Wow.
But as Kierkegaard says, life is lived forward, but it's only understood backwards. And when I was a child, looking back now, I would see these orbs in my room, and they were different colors, like the colors of chakras. Now, I knew nothing about chakras then, and they'd always be floating around in my room. And I could see the 3-dimensionality of my room, and I could see auras around people, which I still do, and around things. And I would wake up sometimes with nosebleeds, but I didn't know my nose was bleeding. I thought I was like, maybe I just didn't know. It's like, it's right on your face, Michael.
No reason
but
you wouldn't.
No. And so I believe it started then. But December 28th, 1989 was when I saw the being that I saw. And then I was seeing them several years. The being I'm talking about, he didn't have this robe on, but this is the kind of head that he had. This is a little Buddha, but he had on they had on it looked like Lost in Space. It looked like Reynolds wrap. It was like a collar here, and he was really thin. I'm using he. This individual was really thin. He was about 4 feet tall. He was on the foot of my bed, 45 West 81st Street, Excelsior Hotel. So it wasn't rural. This was right in Manhattan, baby. And I had never been so scared in my life. And I must tell you, brother, I didn't believe in this. I was Jesus, Lord and Savior. Please don't get me started. But this was the wake up. I mean, I had drifted away from that, but that was my background.
Michael, as a boy, when you would awake and you'd see these apparitions, these globes of light, was this something that you basically thought, oh, there they are again, and accepted it as children do, as part of your reality?
I thought everybody did.
Exactly.
I thought everybody did. I didn't have a vocabulary or nomenclature to describe it, looking back, of course. But yeah, I just thought, I would be just staring at them, and they would just float like that. But I could see, it was like I could reach out and touch them. It was like the 3-dimensionality of my room. But I paid it no mind. But I was always very intuitive.
Do you
always
remember a time when you first mentioned these apparitions to either your mom, your dad,
I
your
never did,
brother,
Peter.
or a friend?
No. Oh, no. I couldn't because I just couldn't.
Yep.
And, I couldn't.
At least you did understand that although it was fine and normal for you, that there was an understood that this was not something to share without anticipating a certain amount of blowback.
Yeah, I just felt that. I don't know how I knew. I mean, listen, when I first came out regarding this to a minister, a Unitarian minister friend of mine back in the 90s,
Hmm.
I remember we were going to Boston. I was doing anti-racism training there, and I won't mention her name, not just for her privacy, but she had a purple Jeep, and we rode. We were driving around Boston, and I told her about uh, what had happened after Mexico, and she said to me, she said, "Michael, I don't know what to say to that." She said, "I believe you believe that's what happened." She said, "But if you want to have a career as a Unitarian Universalist minister, you must never tell anyone that story again."
Interesting, isn't it? How
Yes.
things have changed. And at the
Yes.
same time, she was doing what so many, thoughtful, intelligent people would
Yes.
do in that moment in history and
Yes.
trying to protect you because, of course, it was understood. For me, the mantra is it can't be, therefore it isn't, therefore it's something else.
Yes.
And if you believe it is, you have a problem, or you are a hoaxer, somebody who is mentally defective, somebody
Yeah.
who thinks they can make money on it, who sees fame in this. It's so counterintuitive how this roots of ridicule go. Have you ever had a UFO sighting?
Peter, I never did. I remember one time that I know of, but no. Only I've seen the beings, these different races, but I have not seen a craft.
Going back briefly to thinking, I think I would really enjoy being an actor. Were there any particular actors who you really admired or were fans of, or, inspired you to take that step?
Denzel Washington, of course, Morgan, Sidney Poitier, Harry
Yeah,
Belafonte,
yeah.
Al Pacino, Marlon Brando, uh, loved Meryl Streep. Believe it or not, I liked uh, Marilyn Monroe. I thought she was very talented.
Well, I
I thought,
believe it
I th-
absolutely.
yeah, I
Um,
think people. What's the old saying? They slept on her. They sleep. I don't mean it. They sleep on
yeah,
her. They don't.
yeah,
They. She was so attractive that people didn't see that she also had a craft.
exactly. She was also born into a time where it was much easier to typecast a particularly that type of attractive woman into,
Yeah.
sort of sex pot and superficial roles, but she had tremendous substance, and for me,
Yes.
also great
S
resonance as a performer. And
She
of
was
course, we lost her
beautiful.
much too soon.
Much
Yeah,
too soon.
yeah,
Cicely Tyson. Probably the same people. Clark Gable. I love Errol
yeah.
Flynn. Um, uh, David Niven.
Wonderful.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And I loved anything with Shakespeare.
Okay.
And Olivier. Uh, but any of his plays,
Yeah.
beautiful.
I have to be exercise a little self-control here, or I will keep you geeking out on this while I do
Oh,
too for the rest of the show.
oh, I love it.
Um, to take that step to go into actual training
Yes.
for the ministry, was that something that just kind of happened organically, or do you remember a certain a, a moment of calling, of knowing that this was not just what you
Yeah.
thought you were going to become, what you knew you had to become, and made the decision and registered to study?
You know, Peter, um I knew it was always lurking in the back. I always wanted to serve.
Yeah.
I wanted to give of myself. And I had the high highs and the low lows of being an actor, but I just felt that I wouldn't be able to serve because, it's just a very kind of self-absorbed profession. Classes, pictures, meeting age. I mean, and so I get a show, and then my friends at one time were happier than I was because I knew it would close. And I said, do I want to do this the rest of my life? Not taking away from it, because I love it. I watch the Tonys, but I had to say, for me, what is it that you really want to do? So I would say when I was in my mid-30s, I started backing off a bit. And in some ways, it helped me, because a lot of casting directors were like, it wasn't verbal, but I could feel the relief. Well, we can call Michael. He can be in the background here. We could do. It was like he's not wanting something from us because he's changing careers. And they said, okay, when there's some scenes we can put you in, you will be there.
Got it.
Yeah.
What was it like having your first congregation, and where was that? And what were the circumstances that you were invited to be the pastor, minister of this particular religious group?
Yeah. Well, when I found out that there was a denomination like this where you could be a free thinker,
Yes.
and still be a minister, that was the place for me. The congregation that I serve now is the only congregation I have ever served. I have filled in, for instance, the Universalist Church up on Central Park West. You know where I'm talking about, 76th and Central Park
I
West.
know exactly where it is.
Yeah, it's a landmark. It was called
Yes.
Landmark on the Park.
That's right.
There was a minister there, Reverend Darrell Berger, who happened to identify as a pagan, and he had asked me to. He was on vacation for 3 months. He said, "Hey, would you want this? It's experience," and I said, "Of course." And I would fill in for ministers here and there, but this is my first congregation. I did a lot of hospital chaplaincy, Lenox
Beautiful.
Hill, New York Hospital, Queens. What was it? It was Lenox Hill. It was out in Queens. There was a cancer center right over in Union Square on 14th Street that was part of Lenox Hill.
Okay.
I worked there. I was on my. I had the oncology unit, and back in the
Oh boy.
day when AIDS was decimating the theater community, I was a chaplain at Roosevelt Hospital in Midtown. Not not up on 100 and it was St. Luke Roosevelt. So I was at the St. Luke's campus.
The 59th Street, 58.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
About what year was that, give or take?
Oh, that had to be 93, 94, 90. Yeah, the early 90s, early to mid 90s, because I was doing that when my brother was murdered in 95.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because early on, you may have crossed paths with my mom, who worked as a volunteer in the AIDS unit.
What was her name?
Marcy Robbins.
Marcy.
My mom had, among
Did she
other
have
things,
blonde hair, gray blonde hair?
short brown hair as a rule.
Okay.
But she, a remarkable woman, to put it mildly.
Yeah.
But she brought us up to, in part, be of service in our communities, me and my sisters. And at one point in the mid 80s, maybe 86, 87, 86, she had trained to and became a crisis intervention volunteer for the Samaritans organization,
Okay.
based in the UK. And she did it for a year, which is the usual length of time that folks do it. And moving on to work at Roosevelt Hospital,
Yeah.
she said to me, and actually one of my best friends at the time, who was a private investigator, that this would be something we should consider doing.
Yeah.
The training was terrific for lay people, that the value that you could get for yourself and in the future, and the value you could give. It wasn't for a walk-in center. It was New York City. It was Manhattan, but we were shift workers. And Richard did it for a year. I stayed on for 8 years, and then really flamed out at the end. It was a bit much.
Oh, yeah.
But I wanted to ask you, in working in the ministry, what is the most challenging type of scenario that you face, and you've worked again, in oncology units, obviously it probably centers around death, but
Yeah.
that's not necessarily so. What for you was the most challenging for you as an individual working as,
Oh,
for a lot of people, God's representative in that unit or facility?
when I moved here from New York City, I was an emergency room chaplain at a
Oof.
trauma center. And I saw more people die in 3 or 4 weeks than I saw in years of chaplaincy in New York, but it was trauma. The thing with that is, I enjoyed, you don't have time to think because they're coming in. Motorcycle accident, gunshot wound, stabbing, domestic. But so you got the adrenaline. But I wasn't realizing how I was burning out.
That was kind of my question was leading to.
And I was drinking more than usual, but I had no idea. It's just the drink after work with the other chaplains. And this, my ex-father-in-law said to me, he said, "You look terrible."
Hmm.
Uh, he said, who heals the healer? What are you doing?
Hmm.
And it was like throwing cold water in my face. And the only reason I say it was challenging because you get so used to it that you don't know what's happening to you. And there are many ministers with substance abuse problems, with, health issues because you got to take care of yourself.
Yeah.
And you're not taught that. You're supposed to be selfless. You're not supposed to, and that was crazy. So now I do practice a lot of self-care. I'm not in a chaplaincy role anymore, even though I still do visit people in the hospital. So those skills come in handy. I love doing pastoral care. It's, and who knows, maybe I will do more of it when I retire. I spent much of my life in the hospital with asthma, very bad.
Hmm.
So I don't shy away from hospitals.
Yeah.
It's I'm giving back because people gave to me.
Yes. Yeah, I think that's one of the great lessons in life, and something that a lot of folks, good people, are frightened of initiating. It's just too scary to contemplate, but in reality, it has its own rewards.
I believe that we're here to serve, Peter,
Yeah,
and I
I do
believe
too.
we're here to learn to love,
Yes.
and in all its many facets, and that's the challenge, and so that's kind of where I'm coming from. Even before my UFO experiences, I don't know whether I know it intuitively or that there is a place, maybe that's where we go to and come back from, where
Mm.
we don't behave towards each other like this, you know?
You kind of set up the next question for me, which is at a certain time in your work in the ministry, your attention started to turn to places in Scripture
Yeah.
which were open to interpretation,
Yes.
which for some
Yes.
people immediately is blasphemous. For me,
Yes.
I was brought up in the Reformed Jewish tradition. I had a basic religious education at Central Synagogue in Rockville Center, New York.
Yes.
Um, Born in New York City, but kind of came of age out on Long Island. And I was bar mitzvahed.
Yep.
And from that point on, I attend synagogue sometimes when somebody dies, when
Yeah.
somebody's born, when somebody gets married, or once visiting friends in Liverpool, England during the high holidays. And they said,
Yeah.
"Why don't you come to our synagogue with us
Yeah.
for, Yom Kippur?"
Yeah.
And I thought, well, I don't know. I don't have a suit with me. They said, "Oh, it'll be just fine. A nice sweater, they call a jumper, will be just fine. It's an interesting service. It's sung." I thought, oh, okay. It lasted about 18 days. It was it was a very historic synagogue from the 1880s with the women up in the balcony.
Wow.
Every man had his best suit on.
Yes.
I went into something of an altered state, not necessarily in the best sense of the word, with all due respect to my Jewish brethren, but I was brought up to understand that the Bible was a number of things together, that it was the actual accounts of real people alive back in the day doing the best they could to tell us what it was like, that it was analogies, morality lessons, recyclings of myths from earlier cultures,
Yes.
and that one of the things I love about Reform Judaism, it had a minimum of dogma. Essentially, it was God is love, figure the rest out for yourself.
Yeah.
And I grew up in a town,
Yeah.
village on Long Island that was an archdiocese for Nassau County. That was the archdiocese for Nassau County, about 1 million Catholics at the time, and had a
Wow.
lot of young Catholic friends who would tell me all of the stuff they were learning, which boggled my mind
Yeah.
because it didn't really it didn't fit into the world of the science classes and the philosophy I understood at that
Exactly.
time.
Exactly.
And it wasn't until I was in my 30s and at first obsessed with and then a serious student of the possibility of ancient visitations that I began to turn my attention to scripture. And for me, there's certainly enough to keep one busy for several lifetimes in interpreting. This may have been an absolutely understandable misinterpretation
Yes.
of a visitation rather than something ethereal and more
Yes.
traditionally about God. For me, the one that I keep coming back to is Ezekiel
Oh,
because
yeah.
it's so literal and it's the wheel within the wheel with eyes all around and the angel. And of course, angel, the word going back to the ancient Sumerian. Zachariah Sitchin was a friend of mine and a mentor.
I met him
And
in New York. Yes.
yeah, we used to
On the
go out
upper
for
on the
lunch
Upper West
sometimes.
Side. Yes. Yes.
His first book, which was The 12th Planet,
Yeah.
for me, one of the most extraordinary books for me in terms
Oh,
of rethinking everything I thought I knew. I've read a lot of the books that he wrote after that, but
me
The
too.
12th Planet was the one, and understanding, for example, that in Sumerian, the furthest language we can trace things to, the word angel had no religious connotation. It was
Yeah.
a word more rooted in the halls of power. It was a go-between. It was an emissary.
Yeah, that's right. Emissary.
Yeah. And so at one point, this has got to be 25, 30 years ago, I had my own Old Testament from which Rabbi Lieberman gave me when I was bar mitzvahed. And I went to the library. I borrowed Bibles from different friends. And I went not paragraph by paragraph, but word for word through Ezekiel. And of course, the translations are remarkably similar. And at a certain point, something compelled you to start to look at the Old Testament and perhaps related scripture in ways that you had not been trained to do. Was that just natural curiosity, or was there an event, or how did that initiate for you?
I think I was kind of led to it, Peter,
Mm,
because up until the time I had that first visitation, and then the next couple years were pretty heavy. I was having visitations every full and new moon for about 8 months, almost a year. And in that time, I saw the people who I saw. Yeah, they weren't really gray. They were kind of chalk white. I saw two reptilians, but they kept coming. And later on, I can tell you about a healing I had, but they were with more Nordic people. But I'm not wired that way about when people want to talk about propulsion systems and back engineering. I'm not like, I go to the religious,
sure.
the spiritual kind of,
Yep.
and they're not always the same thing. But and I felt like I was being led. Met Bud, met John Mack. So I'm meeting the people. I'm traveling in certain circles, And then, but the real inspiration was our good brother Barry Downing. When I heard about his book, The Bible and Flying Saucers,
Yes.
it was like, to coin a phrase, manna from heaven. Because even though Barry's not an experiencer, he even told me one day, I don't think I want to be, but I said, here's a minister writing about this.
Yes. Very courageously, and starting back in
Yes.
the 60s.
Yes. Yeah. I mean, 200 years ago, they'd have hung him by a sour apple tree. Something untoward would have happened.
What was left of him after they burned him alive?
Oh my God. But and we got in contact and we've met. I mean, he came down here many, many years ago, he and his wife, Ellie. And so I started reading other stories about folks
Yes.
by folks that were using this as a point of departure. I'm Ted Peters, one, he's out on the West Coast. Of course, Joseph Bloomrich,
Yes.
Spaceships of Ezekiel,
Yes.
E.L. Dion, Does God Drive a Flying Saucer? I have both
Mhm.
his books here. There was a woman here, and I have her book, UFOs and had some female energy in the house. Reverend Virginia Brazington from right here in Asheville, North Carolina, wrote a book back in the 50s and 60s about UFOs in the Bible. I have them all back there. And so I was like, okay, I'm on firm ground here. But I could not talk about it. Couldn't talk about my experiences. When Union Theological Seminary, jumping ahead now, class of 2000, when they were saying, what's your thesis going to be? And I said, UFOs in the Bible. I must give them credit.
Really?
Because they could have said, young man, you're not graduating from here with that kind of tripe. Are you kidding me? They encouraged me.
Bravo.
Dolores Williams, my systematic theology professor, asked me to stay on for a PhD. Oh God, what's his name? He wrote about black theology. James Cone.
Okay.
Asked me to stay on, and I turned it down because I didn't want to be 65 still paying for my my education. And I don't know whether I was. It was just they said fine. They said if you can make a decent argument, and I had my advisor, and they said keep writing, keep writing. So I was very, very fortunate.
Michael, we're going to devote, of course, the lion's share of the second part of the show to UFOs in the Bible, UFOs and ancient imagery, medieval imagery,
Yes.
etc. But we're talking off camera before we recorded this, and you mentioned deism, and I want to spend a few minutes on that because as somebody who does not see myself as a religious person.
Sure.
Certainly, I have a strong spiritual aspect and have traveled more than most people, and that includes countries that you couldn't go to now for $1 million with 100 bodyguards. I roamed around the Tora Bora region in Afghanistan. I visited Iran twice. I've been all over India, mostly on foot, Pakistan, and when growing up, there was a phrase that we've all heard. It was just kind of white light for certain people of faith, which was, I'm a God-fearing person. And I don't remember how old I was before I really took a hard look at that phrase. And I thought, wait a minute, I understand, from the stories in the Bible, that God can be very hard-assed and smote you completely if you don't follow the rules that he set down.
Yes.
But again, I was taught this was morality lessons. It wasn't like rules that I had to follow. Also, growing up in the Reform Jewish tradition, where we had a great deal more leeway in formulating our own ideas and beliefs about the great matrix of the beyond. I am very clear that I do not know what happens after we die. I have my thoughts, my dreams, my musings, but I am very clear that I don't know.
Right.
And I know billions of people know or believe they know, and the belief is based in faith. The faith is reinforced by belief. And if that supports them in living happily and drawing strength and comfort at difficult times,
So
God
be it.
bless them and more
So
power
be it.
to them.
Yes.
But I thought, I'm not a God-fearing person. I don't fear God. And I don't believe that I will be standing before a white and a white guy with a white beard,
Yes.
in the clouds being judged.
Yes.
I follow a philosophy that for me comes deeply rooted from the time I'm a teenager, more in the scientific
Agree.
work of Wilhelm Reich and the idea of
Yes. Very
self-regulation.
familiar with. Yes. Yes.
Self-regulation, the
Very,
idea that
very familiar with Will and Wright.
we, at a certain point, we understand, unless we are mentally ill, the specific differences between acting in a positive manner and a negative manner,
Yes.
between bad and good, between evil and right, and we have choices. And for me, whatever one can argue about both sides of God, for me, the devil is the greatest invention of man to not take responsibility for his actions. And I'm
Yeah.
very specific there in saying not mankind, but man, because I don't think any woman came up with this, that, oh, the
Exactly.
devil made me do it. I
Yes.
believe evil exists in the world. And I remember at a certain point in asking a conversation with my rabbi as a boy about, you know, um, the idea of the chosen people. And what he explained was that phrase, as you grow older, you will understand it cuts both ways in so many words. That when you learn more about the history of the Jews in the 20th century, it's not necessarily a good thing.
Yeah.
And, obviously, as I got older, I understood it. But then at a certain point, that idea of human tragedy strikes, and it can be devastating. And, just take your worst case, most tragic scenario, and a family, an individual, a community is left heartbroken, grief-stricken, absolutely in agony. And one thought that is put forward, it's part of God's plan. It's not for us
Oh,
to understand it. I have
yeah.
a
Yeah.
giant problem with that and always did. And if I thought for a moment, and this will, if it upsets anybody, I am sorry. But if I thought for a moment that God did stuff like that to just, see what happens with people who teach them lessons, I'd be a full-scale atheist quicker than anybody could even see me go. And deism taught me the most important lesson here. And as you mentioned when we were originally talking, most of the founding fathers, for what it's
Yeah.
worth, of this country were deists.
Yes.
And one of the things about deism that I find absolutely inspiring is the idea that I acknowledge there is a spark of divinity in the universe, call it what you will. I go to church, I am a Christian, but my understanding is that God is not a micromanager. And there are things that are, well, destiny or that were set in motion. But other ways, stuff happens. Coincidences happen. Tragedies come out of nowhere, like a bad weather storm. And that is not necessarily part of God's plan. There's not an intent to inflict pain
Right.
in the philosophy that I follow. It's that happened. It was terrible, but no divine force set it in motion. And I wondered what your thoughts are on that before we go to break. We have about
You
2 minutes.
you've summed it up pretty well there. Again, I have I try to understand that mindset because I came from that. But like Paul says in Corinthians,
Mm,
when I was a child, and I don't want to offend, but I thought like a child. I
mm.
acted as a child, but now I'm a man. And there are things that we just don't understand, and that's okay. Sometimes the questions are more important than the answers. But I cannot say that a loving God sends his son here to be beaten and spit on and to prove a point that this is, just say you don't know. As a matter of fact, the way I was trained as a chaplain was that you don't burst anybody's bubble unless you have something better to put there.
Beautiful.
But I, if that's someone's belief system, I can work with that. But that to me, I couldn't worship a deity who did that. But it took me a while to find that out.
Reverend Carter, amen to that. And with that, this is Peter Robbins and my very special guest, Reverend Michael J. Carter. And we will be back in a little over 4 minutes. Stay with us.
Hey members, the new KGRA DB app is now available on iOS and Android devices. Gain on-demand access to any KGRA DB programming. Download any show directly to your mobile device to listen or watch on the go. Go to the App Store and search KGRA DB.
Scrolling all day, time can disappear. Wanna make it count? Why not volunteer?
Posting pics of your food, that takes up time.
Time, you've got time to binge all of season 9, though it got so bad.
Time, you got time. We're gonna grow back and be the same browse you had.
Just a few hours to keep families from harm. Help us end home fires, but sound the alarm.
Volunteer for a day to install free smoke alarms in your community.
Discover the Observation Deck, a one-of-a-kind virtual event platform that takes video conferencing to the next level by using avatars to navigate a campus. There's so many areas and activities to choose from. There's a 1,000-seat auditorium, an expo hall, a nightclub, and even a beach. So come attend a conference, take a class, or hear a lecture on the incredible Observation Deck campus. Go to theobservationdk.com.
You're listening to the KGRA Digital Broadcasting Network. We provide unparalleled coverage of trending news in the world of ufology, cryptozoology, and paranormal phenomenon. Whether you're watching our video live stream or listening to one of our audio programs, you are getting the best from world-renowned researchers and hosts, guiding you through topics the mainstream won't touch. Miss one of your favorite programs? No problem. Head over to the members area at kgradb.com for access to our massive library of award-winning content. Make contact, stay connected, only at kgradb.com.
Welcome back to Meanwhile Here on Earth with me, your host, Peter Robbins, and my guest for today, Reverend Michael J. Carter, speaking to us from beautiful Asheville, North Carolina. Well, I am just outside of beautiful Ithaca, New York, in central New York State. Did you have a nice break, Michael?
Yes, I did. I forgot. I was sitting here and just looking around. And I said, Peter's not coming back right now. So I ran upstairs. Yeah, I literally just got back. I sat there for about 2 minutes. Yeah, I just wanted to make sure. My partner, her cat is upstairs. Well, it's our cat. And she has dementia. And she screams at the top of her lungs. She's a sweetie. And I said, baby, I'm coming back up. And I just gave her some treats. But I was like, Peter's not coming back right now. So I just went up. I got to tell you, Peter, I'm having a wonderful time.
Oh, good. Me too.
I'm very happy.
It's
very happy.
Really wonderful having this extended period of time with you, Michael. And we have had some good friends and mentors in common.
Yes.
I know you have many photos of you with figures in the work, but one of them in particular, who has certainly had a tremendous impact on my life.
Oh, Bud.
There's the late great Bud Hopkins there. This is such a wonderful photo.
Oh my God, yes. Bud, how can I say? I love Bud. Who
Yeah,
didn't? I mean,
yeah.
I'm sure there were some, but um, what I loved about Bud, he regressed me. By the way, he was the second person to regress me.
Mm-hmm.
First of all, he was very good at his craft.
Oh boy, was he ever? Yeah.
I've got to tell you. And Bud at that time, we didn't see eye to eye on the like I'm looking at my experiences from a more positive man. Not saying that I don't have, I still have post traumatic stress. But at the end of it, I say it was a good thing. At that time, Bud couldn't understand that. He said, "Michael, what are you saying?"
So many people who were genuinely traumatized, especially back in the
Yeah,
day when there
yeah,
was very little in the way of cultural references or other people in the field. He basically did triage, and
yes,
certainly I attended almost all of the original support groups there in my capacity as his long-term assistant. Also,
yeah.
the privilege of being there because my sister was an original member as well. Um, but I witnessed many regressions that he did. And one of the things that set him apart, and I know now more than ever, a lot of people say, well, regressive hypnosis, it can be manipulated. It's like witness testimony. You can't trust it. Well, I think those are overgeneralizations. And
Oh,
Bud,
definitely.
when he decided to train to do regressive hypnosis, he did something that I don't think anyone else in the field did, which was he studied, he qualified, he was certified, and then worked under the tutorage of one of the real pioneers in the field, a brilliant psychologist named Dr. Aphrodite Clamar. He
Yes,
he
yes.
worked under her
Aphrodite Clamar. Yes.
guidance for 7 years before he fully went off on his own, which gives him a
Wow.
credibility for me that no one
Yeah,
else comes close to, although
yeah.
there are some very fine people in the field.
Oh, no question, no question,
Um,
no question.
in 86 or so, as Bud's assistant and certainly confidant in so many respects, he said, I need you to be aware, because this is going to be occupying some of my time right now, that a well-known American writer has presented himself here. He's absolutely traumatized, but he has had classic experiences, and he is Whitley Strieber. And I knew who Whitley was. Two of his books had already been made into movies. He, for me, was kind of a demi Stephen King in terms of his
Yes,
style, and
yes.
a very good writer indeed. My favorite was a book that was made into a movie called Wolfen, which was very original. It was a story of a ghost wolf loose in Central Park,
I remember it.
and a tough,
I do.
hard-boiled, no-nonsense, seen it all, done it all, New York City detective, brilliantly played by the late great British actor Albert Finney.
Oh my
Uh,
goodness, I didn't know
and
that.
I started to read more of Whitley's books. And then at a certain point, as Bud kind of, kept me updated, that Whitley was actually working on a manuscript for his experience. And the idea that he knew that when he published it, people were going to come down on him like 10 tons of bricks, in
Yes.
part because he was, scary Gothic fiction writer in great part.
Yeah.
And at a certain point, without any real warning, he cold called me and just cut right to the point of, I know you're fully aware of what's been going on with me. And I finished a manuscript. It's been professionally proofread, but I asked Bud if he knew anybody in the field who was a good writer, a competent editor, who also was open-minded about this subject, that I could run this manuscript past. And he said, Peter. So I want to know if you'll read my manuscript. Well, of course, I was very flattered, and a little ego boost there. And I said, well, of
Yeah.
course, just send it over. I live on West 57th Street. He lived down in the Village.
Yeah.
He said, no, there's only one printed copy. I need you to come here as early on a certain morning as you can. We will put you up in our guest room after breakfast. You will not come out until you finish reading that manuscript, and then give me your feedback. And I thought, Well, there's a day I'll never get back, but
Yeah,
I can't turn this down. And I showed up
exactly.
at 9 in the morning on LaGuardia Place, had a lovely breakfast with him and Ann and their
Yeah.
son, and food and snacks and non-alcoholic beverages continued to come into the room until it was dark out. And
Woo,
then we sat down in the living room and I told him my thoughts on it.
that's
The
beautiful.
main one, which was I knew he was still in therapy, and as
Yeah.
somebody who was in therapy with a remarkable psychotherapist for almost 7 years, which began primarily to normalize um, this return memory of this UFO sighting I had with my sister that when it returned completely destabilized my life. It was another
Oh,
time. And Dr. Baker helped me tremendously with it, in part because he took the subject seriously, had had two of his own sightings, and for 11 years had been Wilhelm Reich's first assistant.
oh
And
my
that was
goodness.
something that I had
Wilhelm
already
Reich.
been involved in for many years.
Yeah.
Anyway, to cut to the chase, I suggested to Whitley that because he was still so deeply working through this, that he might want to continue to just polish the manuscript and give a little more perspective, and that I thought the manuscript was really exciting and, of course, would be a very popular book. Thanked me profusely. My intuition is that it went to the printer the next day.
Oh my God.
So,
Yeah.
he did just fine with it. But
Yes.
I bring that up in just because I wanted to,
Oh, Whitley.
there's
Yes.
a very complex and remarkable man who remains a friend, although we haven't seen each other for quite some years. But there you are with him.
Let me tell you, I think they're Harold Eglin standing right behind Whitley.
Sure.
And that's how that support group space, and there's Marianne, and I forget the older woman on the right.
Yeah.
But that support group gave me my sanity. And occasionally we would get together. Well, they were doing this before I was in the group, but they would get together with Bud's group.
Yes.
And it was an interesting mix because it was everybody who thought it was, not everybody, I mean,
No.
but it was a lot of
People who
kumbaya.
had positive and negative experiences, and I know
Yeah.
many people who have had both.
And we got together, but and my book, the God Consciousness. I'm sorry, what was the book? My second book, which I'm sure you'll show, A New World If You Can Take It. Whitley was very kind. He gave me a blurb.
Oh, good.
And he was like, "This is the best book ever written on the subject." I doubt that, but I was just very happy. And the rest is history. I mean, Whitley's out here, and we're all out here, you and I, and getting the word out. And this is the world we're going to live in.
Michael, in the
next few
course
years
of kind of that crossover between your ministry work and your work in the UFO research community, for lack of a more descriptive term, have you ever found yourself kind of bringing both things to the fore in having somebody present themselves to you who had been really traumatized, who had experiences that really shattered their paradigm, that were upset about them, that came to you for guidance? Or can you tell us about that without violating any confidence?
Yeah, well, most of the people that do come to me, Peter, are coming to me because, yes, their paradigm that has been shattered, but it's the religious question. Can I still believe in God and believe in these beings? Can I still be a good Jewish person? Can I be a good Christian and still? And I bring that up because we were talking about religion and the oppressiveness of it.
Yes.
And the rules and the do's and the don'ts, and that gives them, at least the people I encounter, it's not so much am I crazy, even though that is there, but can I still hold these kinds of beliefs. And I say yes, but I also say, but you never, who was it? Oliver Wendell Holmes, once the mind, I'm paraphrasing, once the mind is stretched, it never goes back to its original dimensions. Well, you can't go back. Your innocence is taken.
Yes.
You can go back and look at it differently. And yes, you can still believe in God or Jesus or Moses or what have you, Moshe, what have you. But once that happens, you have to go with it because it'll bring you more trauma.
I always found it, when I started to think about it, really interesting that this, and with empathy, and I hope with understanding, that so many people who had legitimate encounters, abduction experiences, felt that in one way or another, it threatened their traditional beliefs.
Yes.
Or that in some way it negated the idea of a supreme deity. And I'll share an anecdote with you and our audience. I'll keep it fairly compact. In the late 80s, over a series of summers, I taught in a wonderful arts program out in northeastern Oklahoma. At the time, Bartlesville, Oklahoma was the corporate headquarters of Phillips Petroleum. And a lot of my students, it was a wonderful program called Arts Encounters, were the sons and daughters of executives or engineers. Other ones were Osage and Cherokee kids.
Okay.
And it was a general arts program. And I was about a year into working on Left at Eastgate at the time, the book on the Rendlesham Forest incident. And I had a day off and I was in town, I think having a burger, at a cafe. And a guy goes by the window and stops and looks at me and waves. It's the father of one of my students. Comes in, chats a bit, and then says, "You're not going to believe this. I got a call from such and such last night." He said, "You're not going to believe this. I was watching TV. It was one of those wild shows about flying saucers. And Peter Robbins is on the show." And he starts laughing and he says, "Obviously, he made a mistake, right?" I went, "Well," and I explained to him that this was an area of study I was not just involved in, but quite seriously, and that I had been on some television shows and that this was one of them, possibly. He was crestfallen. He said to me in so many words, "We know you. You've had dinner at our homes. You work with our children. We thought you were, well, not somebody who believed in this stuff."
Normal,
he said,
like us.
"Seriously?" I said, "Yeah." And then he did something that really created the story I'm about to tell you. He said, "I'm a member of," and he named, whether it was Kiwanis or the Lions Club or the Rotarians, a member here. And we have a group within there, and we have dinner together at the our clubhouse, our establishment building, every month, and we're called the SOBs. And I guess he saw the look on my face. He says, "Skeptics of Bartlesville." And every month we invite a speaker for dinner and drinks that we know we're going to disagree with. And we will drink and we will have a wonderful time. You'll sit at the head of the table and then you'll make your case on whatever hell crazy thing you believe in, and we'll tear you apart. Are you game for this? I said, "Absolutely." I was scheduled for a week or two after that. I called my sister and said, "Go into my files and pull these files, FedEx them to me, and I'm going to go in armed for bear here."
Yeah.
And it was indeed a lovely night. And these were very good people as far as I was concerned. Literally all Christians. I think there were like 80 Baptist churches. And I grew up, there's a Baptist church in the town. It was black. I didn't know there were like 80 different kinds of Baptists, and they all knew that the other ones were the wrong kind of Baptists, and that they were going to go to hell because they were the wrong kind of Baptist, which I found entertaining in a very depressing way. And we have a lovely dinner together, and we drink. And at a certain point, he says, "Well, this is Pete Robbins. You all know him. He's worked with our kids. Here's a little introduction. And he's going to make a case for why UFOs are real." And, most of these people were well-trained engineers, had lived around the world or, had top secret clearances, the older one during World War II. They were a formidable crew.
Yeah.
And so I had documents, I started to go through the litany of this document. Let me take a look at that. Oh, for God's sakes, the CIA, they don't got their heads up their behinds and they don't know what they're talking about. And, okay, here's one from Ronald Reagan's administration. Thought that would get them. No, they just kept negating everything that I was saying.
Yeah.
Finally, I'm down to my last few. And I said, right, what I'm about to show you are 2 letters. They're scanned. They are on the stationery of the American Senate. This is a senior senator from his state who not only took the subject seriously, but was in the Air Force Reserves. He's a general. And it's dear such and such constituent. Thank you for your letter. Like you, I take the subject of UFOs, some UFOs being, extraterrestrial in nature, very seriously. When I spoke to General Curtis LeMay and asked him what's in Hangar 18 at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, he said, that's none of your business and don't ever ask me that question again. I hope you're successful in your inquiry. All the best, Barry Goldwater. Well, the room went crazy.
Wow.
Let me see those letters. And I had 2 letters fairly identical in contact. Are these real? Yes, they are. You can, this is before, Google, but you can confirm. Well, they started arguing with each other. And all of a sudden, it wasn't fun and it wasn't pretty and it wasn't nice. And at a certain point, interestingly, the only woman attending who was a senior Phillips petroleum engineer, she just stopped the meeting and she said, I am disgusted. We invited Peter here, for some entertainment tonight. I can't believe that some of you are taking this seriously. We all know this is nonsense. And I'm out of here. And she walked out and the room went quiet. The oldest gentleman in the room, who I knew was Latter-day Saints, I had worked with some of his grandkids, retired Phillips executive. And he basically said, well, this evening didn't turn out the way we thought it was going to. You have made an interesting case here and got us all to think about things that maybe we'd always thought were nonsensical. He said, may I ask you a personal question? Yeah. He said, you've been kind enough to share with our young people that you grew up in the Jewish faith. Yes. He said, do you believe in God? I said, yes, but maybe not in the same interpretation or way that you do. He said, if you believe in God, and if these things you're saying are true, and to paraphrase Stanton Friedman, that some / not all UFOs are representative of advanced technology from parts unknown under intelligent control, how does this affect your notions of faith and belief in God? I thought, boy, no one has ever asked me that question, ever. Everybody was quiet, and I remained quiet for some moments too, thinking about how to answer it. And then it came to me. And I said, can I have a show of hands here? Who feels that the miracle of God's creation or God's firmament stops at the outer edge of the ionosphere?
Yeah.
No hands went up, and I knew I had already won my argument.
Yeah.
How many feel it extends out 125,000 miles, half the distance to the moon, to Mars, to Pluto, to the edges of, the cosmos? No hands went up. I said, for me, it just reinforces the notion that this divine spirit, for lack of a better term, I don't remember the words I used, is infinite. And of course, that would only reinforce my belief and faith. And that's how that evening ended.
I love it. I love it. You're braver than I was, because I would have said probably with the alcohol on top of it. We
were drinking fairly heavily.
It can go crazy. But I'm with you, and that is the argument. And I think this is one of the reasons why traditional religion is losing the interest of there's some people, they call themselves nuns, or the media calls them that. They have no religion. They're saying I can have experienced this oneness walking in my backyard, going on a hike, and it's scaring people, because we put this God in a box that can only be worshipped in a certain way, that only hears certain people. Well, we've created God in our image. And the God, you ever notice that people who believe in God, their God thinks the same way they do? Have you ever noticed that? So,
and can beat your God's ass.
oh, and I'll beat your ass to show it. So I think I remember the words of Jodie Foster, in Contact.
Yeah,
If
wonderful
this
film.
is all there is, it seems like an awful waste of space. If it's just us, when she's talking to Matthew McConaughey. And so I think that's what there's many fears. Okay, Bill at the top of before we came on, there's the economic fears, of course. And we know those arguments. I mean, Dr. Stephen Greer makes a good case. If folks can get here, however they get here, well, we don't need Exxon, we don't need BP. You will be able to, because there's money in all this stuff. If they can get here, some of these diseases may go away. And so I mean, there are many reasons why people fear it, but I think it's because we don't understand. And what we don't understand, we fear, and we demonize.
That's true. And before we go on, I have to say that Dr. Greer, who of course is very popular presence in the work, smart, certainly a brilliant presenter, multiply published author, for me negates his case massively by taking what I consider extremist positions for simply saying there are, and then give a number, 57 alien races visiting the world today, which is absolutely unconfirmable, or saying all aliens are good. Both things of which he
I'm
has
with
said.
you, Peter. I'm with you, Peter. I didn't want to go there, but
Well, again, Stephen embodies, both aspects of this
he
subject.
does. And I think other things. I think his ego's got out of control. It's like he's done a lot of good, but he does negate the case. All these beings are not going to sing Kumbaya with us or anybody else. And when you start getting into numbers, but I think I feel, got too big too fast. And also it's easily to give your power away. And there are people who he's like their guru. He's the he's the emissary.
Well, essentially, I don't know how else to say it. For me, he leads a cult, a very successful cult in the work. And unfortunately, in this golden age of conspiracies, there's more and more perceived legitimacy in being an extremist to one direction or another.
Yes.
And that makes it all the more difficult for, I don't know, whether or not you see this as something spiritual or pragmatic, to move forward in a way that doesn't upfuse and confuse folks who want more information but are not sure where to turn.
Well, I agree. I agree with you.
And with
I agree
that,
with you.
I want to turn to something that fascinates us both. Again, I began my career as an artist. I was very lucky as a young person to grow up in New York City and to have grandparents who took me to the Metropolitan Museum and Museum of Modern Art and Museum of Natural History from before I could remember. And I grew up loving museums and then working in galleries and being a painter and teaching painting. And with the popularity of Ancient Aliens, which of course has been a powerhouse in terms of television presentations around this subject, a show that I've been on, that I enjoy, that I think has made my dear old friend Giorgio and his hair the most famous hair in the world as far as the paranormal goes. I think part of the problem of the show, digress for a moment, is they chose the name Ancient Aliens, and you can only generate so many programs around that theme without really pushing out the frontiers of aliens. Yes, when maybe it's aliens. No. And with that, I want to go to a cave painting. As I recall, this is from Australia. It's somewhere between 20 and 30,000 years old. And it's a perfect example of the kind of art that is, I'll say it with respect, even though it seems disrespectful, hyped as there they are. These are space beings who so impressed, these primitive peoples that they painted them on their walls. Well, one of my great role models in terms of investigation, whose work has interested me since I was about 10 years old, is Sherlock Holmes.
Yes.
And the idea of deductive reasoning, that you begin to investigate a mystery by fully exploring the most mundane, everyday possibility that could answer your question. If after doing that, you have not been able to resolve it, you don't jump to the most exotic. You simply take one step up to the next most boring, mundane possibility. And you
Right.
work that system till you get to the top. So when I see this image, for example, presented as evidence or even proof of the thesis of ancient visitations, which I'm sure happened and I take very seriously, my first thought is, isn't it possibly more likely that that shape that looks like maybe the top of a clear space helmet is a bent branch attached to a simple, apparatus made of wood at the neck, and those are other sticks in it, and it had
Right.
some ceremonial thing to imitate an aura or to be pointy and look violent, as opposed to, oh my God, space beings. This
Yeah.
one is Ethiopian, probably 8th century or something. And once again, gosh, they've got the big eyes and either helmets or auras or something. Maybe yes, maybe no, but
Right.
certainly not proof. We go on here, where we jump back to part of a cylinder seal from ancient Sumeria. And
From
of course,
Samaria, yes.
Gilgamesh, part of this first epic tale, kind of the forerunner of Ulysses, has our protagonist being taken on a fiery chariot to another world and then coming back. Is this a representation of ancient flying things in the sky? Because it was depicted in the sky. We have many examples of it. One you provided. Talk about this wonderful image.
When I was in Chichen Itza, now this is
Yeah.
not a one I took.
Oh,
No, the ones I took were so blurry and they were just so unprofessional that, they're just in my scrapbook.
it's
I
a great
saw this.
image.
Isn't it beautiful? But
Mm.
and what I was told was that this had nothing to do with extraterrestrials. It was what the guy told us, that if you could stomach it, that sometimes when they did the sacrifices, they would put the
Mm.
heart of the
Mm.
individual on that little thing that looks like a
Ah,
dish there.
uh-huh, uh-huh.
Yeah, and so that's what that was.
Brutal
I put
culture.
Yes, I picked that because of the pyramid in the back.
Yeah, it's a beautiful
And
picture.
yeah, but no, I'm not saying that that has anything to do with extraterrestrials. And I think you're hitting a point that, okay, I'll just say it this way. I've been on the show many times. They've been good to me,
Hmm.
but that doesn't mean I agree with everything that they do. And it's a moneymaker, and
It
that's what
is.
Hollywood is about,
Yep.
first and foremost.
And
And
often again, it walks that line between entertainment and quality information that is part of
yeah,
what you need to do.
well, yeah. But there could be more reasoning in it. There could be more of an emphasis on, we're just trying to get you to think. We're
Mm.
not saying it is, but they've just taken that ball and they've run with it.
Here's one that I have great affection for. It is a fresco that has been
Oh,
maintained
yes.
in a monastery in what I'm what was or is Yugoslavia. I forget whether Yugoslavia exists right now or whether or not it's
I don't
under
think it
another
does.
name.
Yeah.
But we know it was painted about 1350.
Yeah.
And the logo um, here
Yes. Look at that.
Yeah, it's
Look
really
at
quite
that.
wonderful. And the Meanwhile Here on Earth logo in the upper right covers up another image. You see in the upper left, and
It
here we
looks,
are, of course, at the crucifixion,
yes.
something intriguing. And what we're looking at is
Yes,
this,
yes.
which is pretty intense. Now, one can argue this is allegorical in some way. It's an interpretation of a angel or something, or it's maybe a depiction of something more literal. And the one in the upper right, even more so, it's worthy of discussion. It's intriguing, and it's one that I find compelling. Although, again, it does not constitute evidence of extraterrestrial visitation in art form, but it suggests a possibility. Here's one. Also, basically a fuller, showing of it in higher resolution. But to make the choice in a 14th century triptych held in a monastery to have those two images in it, in the most sacred scene in Christendom, is thought-provoking.
Yes.
For lack of
Well,
a more descriptive term.
well said. Well phrased. Well, and see, this is why the religious aspect has to be considered, and no one is doing it.
And
this is another.
It's true. One, if you look closely at these, I think I remember from a close-up that there are angelic heads within each of those traditional flying saucer shapes. And one can also argue it's not without reason that that shape isn't exclusive to, a lot of UFO sightings. But
Yes.
once again, it's thought-provoking. This one is called Glorification of the Eucharist. It was done about 1600, and it just baffles me. Had no UFO imagery, but it does seem that there's a globe there with antennas.
Yes, it does.
And it is what it is, and it's just one that will never get an answer to, even from religious scholars, because that's what it looks like, and that's the way it is. We know from European history that in anywhere between the late 1400s and the later 1600s, rod-like apparitions appeared over Germany, Belgium, Switzerland, and often mixed with other shapes in the sky. So much so that they were the subject of broadsides, the precursors of newspapers, where printers, everybody in your community within that part of your country would see these things. And they were simply printed and distributed kind of to mark the occasion.
Wow.
This one obviously is quite literally. Well, this one is the New World, or in England, but it's 1661. And here's one of many interpretations of Ezekiel.
Yes.
Again, I find the story so compelling. And had I thought this out a bit more, I would have taken down my Old Testament and, yea, verily, read it into our record. That, there's poor Ezekiel minding his business, tending his flock, and this wheel within a wheel of the appearance of burnished beryllium with eyes all around, which some of us have interpreted as a circular or disc shape with windows that's made of metal.
And lights, yes.
It comes down and it lands kicking up sand and everything. And by some interpretations in the readings, the being, the quote unquote angel that emerges from it, has some kind of ceremonial helmet. I don't know how else to say it, with a lion on one side, an eagle on the other side, and so on. If so, I look for examples in history that I can go to support this, which for some is literal biblical fact, for others is mythology, for others is open to interpretation. But sometimes you just have to go to science fiction. I was not into science fiction as a kid, really, with the exception
at all
of the wonderful B movies that I grew up on, usually on Saturday afternoons with some of my friends at the Fantasy Theater in Rockville Center, New York. Often 2 films and a newsreel and popcorn and a cartoon for 1 penny. Just kidding. That was my father. But for ridiculously small amount of money, and monsters from space and giant, atomic mutant creatures and just stuff that I love. But I wasn't a big science fiction reader, except thankfully for some Jules Verne, some H.G. Wells. But the idea of put forward in the original first 2 years of Star Trek, the only one that ever really interested me, which makes me not even worth speaking to true Star Trek fans. But the Prime Directive, Gene Roddenberry, the creator of the series, was also something of a visionary. And some of his themes were right up there with the best science fiction ever written. And the idea that if you ever interface with a culture that is less advanced than you, the Prime Directive was never, ever reveal the width and the breadth and the amazing aspects of your technology to them. They'll melt down. Their civilization has potential of collapse.
And they'll worship you. They'll worship you.
Yes. And I found validation for that in, of all places, the works of Carl Jung. Not everybody knows that one of the most famous psychologists in the history of, this area of science and psychology studies, that he wrote a book called Flying Saucers. I
remember that. I remember reading. Yeah.
A myth of things seen in modern skies, something like that.
Yes.
And being young, the book essentially says, by the time you finish reading it, this is a projection of mankind looking for a new pantheon of gods to assist us in this troubling times, out of the problems we've created for ourselves. And yeah, we probably get visited by guys from space too. But he cites, I believe it's in that book, this meeting
I think I have that book.
It's worth reading or rereading, especially for folks that, what Jung wrote about UFOs. That's amazing. I think it was an account from around the time of World War I, where Jung is meeting with an older African tribal leader who might have been referred to as, by less sensitive folks as a witch doctor.
Right.
But in the 1880s, I think it was, he was a boy, but clearly remembered that moment when things have been going on for, however long, hundreds of years, millennia, were unchanged, and British explorers march into the village in red tunics, carrying these sticks that created thunder and could kill an animal on the other side of the village.
Yes.
And with white skin. Who were they? Were they gods? Were they devils? Were they our ancestors? Were they ghosts?
It's like the cargo cults, right?
Exactly.
Yes.
And Jung's question in so many words was, what was the impact on your village, on your culture? And the response was, I think word for word, all of our dreams died. All of a sudden, nothing could be trusted or thought of in the same way. And that is something for me that, as we go on, I'd like your thoughts on. When people say disclosure and disclosure now and disclose everything, when I first got involved in this work in the later 70s, I thought of myself as an activist and was coming from, being a protester of the Vietnam War and My thought was, power to the people, we can handle it. Well, there are so many people that we know that probably are ready and can handle it, but we represent a relatively modest percentage of the general population of this country and the world. And there are a lot of good, hardworking people who are not prepared for this.
Yeah.
And so disclosure, which is coming very slowly, if it's up to the American government, it will take several hundred years, and it will all be stage managed like a kabuki play, like it is right now of,
Yes.
oh, look, we have these, things on film from 2004. Gosh, this is amazing. Paying no attention at all to anything that came before that.
Right.
And, keeping it going slow and keeping everybody focused on this entity.
Yeah.
Anyway,
Yeah.
to just finish the thought that I think the greatest challenge about disclosure may be that water seeks its own level and people need to kind of appreciate it at different points, but you can't just say to folks, yes, UFOs are real, and some of them are hard metal machines, other ones are, mystical apparitions, others
Yeah.
are interdimensional forms, others are thought form, who knows, whatever, pure energy. But talking about the ones that are manifested in the material world, that you can't ignore that questions will follow about, well, if that's true, then that thing really that crashed at Roswell wasn't a weather balloon, and that it was recovered, and we've done some back engineering on it, and some people understand what's going on here, and that there are these beings, and that there are hybrid beings, and that they're missing pregnancies, these more exotic things, they'll fall on their sword before they address.
Right.
So it's dodgy, but this brings us to a piece of art which for me was a game changer. It's 17th century, the school of Frau Lippi, and it is
that oh yes,
a beautiful medieval painting, classic Madonna and Child and Angel, and something above the Madonna's left shoulder, above the right there, that when we close in on it, when I first saw this years ago, I thought a phrase I can repeat it because we're not FCC, but I won't. But it was, and my first thought was, I'm a painter. And thinking about the role of painters pre the 1830s with the invention of this device called a camera. If you were a realist, up until the modern era in the 19th century, when painters had the gall to start going off on their own and weren't working off of court commissions or the church or, painting portraits of wealthy people, I thought, let's just say I'm commissioned to do this painting by the church, but I've had an experience. I've seen something that's been life-changing to me. And I was out walking my dog in the countryside, and lo and behold, we saw this thing. Now, this is purely subjective. It's me as a painter saying, would I be compelled to record this for history, even at the risk? Because I am as sure as I can be that that little figure there is a depiction by the painter of himself. That's, again, purely subjective.
Yeah.
And that's his dog. And when we close in on it, this is not baby Jesus. This is not an angel. This is an anomalous UFO.
Yes, this is a craft.
Maybe those lines are to suggest that it was glowing or energized in some manner. But for me, this painting, and again, it's 16th century. Once again, we see here the detail blown up and those details enlarged, and the high intention that the painter went to render that image exactly the way they did. For me, I can't say it constitutes proof, but for me, this is very compelling evidence of just what we're talking about here. And a painting that you sent me a copy of that I have in my files, that's another one that I thought, here it is. Here it is.
Ert de Gelder, right?
This is exactly. It's early 18th century, early 1700s. And one can argue from a theological point of view that it's just, this halo in the sky, shining lights down on the Annunciation. And, like this lighting is so brilliantly Rembrandtian, so to say, in terms of its illumination. It's a beautiful image. Or, holy shit, what am I looking at here? This is the real deal. This is
Yes.
it.
Yes.
This is it.
And see, Peter, for me, this is why religion, all of it, has to get in the conversation.
Bingo.
But particularly Western religion. See, because Buddhism, Hinduism, and even the Catholic Church to a degree,
They've got it pretty well integrated already.
They've got it in there with these many gods and lesser gods, or call it what you will.
Islam still has a pretty big problem too.
Yes, the monotheistic religions.
Bingo.
They're going to have to deal with this.
That's right.
And they're going to have to say, wait a minute, we may need to look at this. We don't have to agree with it, but you can't just keep putting it under the rug. And because that's why so many people, yes, they have the trauma, but their first, not all, I would say 80% of the people that are referred to me, can I still hold on to my religious beliefs? Now, one could say, well, you want to hold on to your indoctrination, but again, you don't want to tamper with people's belief systems.
That's right.
However, this is making them rethink.
That's it. I think also we now have entered an era, and I will mark it starting in late 2017. Some people feel it is the product of several very impacting articles that appeared in the New York Times, written by Leslie Kean, the great Ralph Blumenthal, and I forget the name of the third wonderful credentialed reporter. I don't know if they are responsible for it, but they mark that transition from "you believe in flying saucers, you must be crazy" to the power of ridicule has dissipated to a tremendous degree.
I'm here to tell you.
Where people in theology, or people leading figures in the world of science, or in the media, or in almost any endeavor where it used to be politics, where it used to be professional suicide, to say, I take this seriously,
not anymore,
can now speak up knowing that it won't cost them their career. And that's a good thing. One last image in the way of this, and it's wonderfully tantalizing because we know so little about this, except to say, what the hell is that on that coin? And once again, we're stuck. We can try to do our best to find what I'll laughingly call conventional explanations. I believe this also is early 18th century. The writing is Latin, so it could be...
Yeah, it could be Italy, Rome.
Exactly, France, it could be a number of countries. It doesn't seem to be a coin per se as much as a medallion or token. It doesn't have a stated value, but how about that? And now I want to go into really the last part of our imagery here and talk with the time we have left about your books, Michael. You are a multiply published author. Your works are available on Amazon.com, through the great Barnes & Noble chain, online and in their stores. And we're coming into our last 5 minutes or so, but can you give us a capsule idea?
Sure, I can, Peter.
I mean, the title says it, doesn't it?
Well, yes. For me, the first two books I had written were about UFOs, the Bible, religion, and I was getting this reputation as the UFO minister. I have other interests. One of those, however, was healing. I mean, I'm a Reiki practitioner. What makes people heal. And I also wanted to get away from, dear God, please give me this. Dear God, I didn't want that relationship. So I call it affirmative prayer, science of mind, religious science. I was very much into the metaphysics of religion. And so I wanted people to look at the way we think, their consciousness, and how that contributes or becomes a barrier to the way we heal. Healing being a large rubric. I've known people who have died and had a healing before they died. Something shifted. I know people who were cured of something and got right out of the hospital and went back to their wicked ways. So I'm talking about this, the power of affirmative prayer, affirming what it is I have, affirming what it is I want, being thankful, and not depending on a Santa Claus up in the sky.
You
If you're
remind
naughty,
me, in terms of deist thinking, good things happen to bad people and bad things happen to good people.
all
And
the
it's kind of a crapshoot
time.
in the universe. And sorry that it doesn't link up with,
Yes. So that's what that book's about. This was the second book. I go into
yeah.
Unitarian Universalism. I go into certain historical figures of the church, and a new world, if you can take it, God, extraterrestrials, evolution of human consciousness, how, if we're going to move forward as a species, our idea about God needs to change, our ideas about being alone in the universe, and most importantly, the way, like Einstein said, you can't solve your problems with the same thinking that created them in the first place.
Exactly.
Okay, that's called insanity. So that.
I'm sorry I didn't put these in publishing
Oh,
order.
it doesn't. No, it's okay. This was my master's thesis.
Wow.
And a friend of mine, a publisher, said, come on, put your big boy pants on and just put it out there and stop it. Stop it. So I mentioned my initial experience in it. It's pretty thorough about that. So that's it. And the last one, I think it should be God consciousness. That's my latest one. Initiation. Talking about. That's it. That's just the back of it. It's okay.
Oh, okay.
It's talking about people like us who've had these experiences and have changed for the better, becoming more authentic, becoming more genuine, becoming more, if I can dare use the word, more loving human beings.
And the cover that I don't have here, what is that book?
This is the last book was called God Consciousness. I may have sent it to you. It's a 30-day meditation manual.
Right.
From atheists, from Buddhists, from Christians, from pagans. It's a lesson each day from one of these disciplines. I should have put God in quotations because it's not your grandparents' God. But again, it's about the connection we have with all that is, and how, again, the consciousness, this belief, the getting over the belief of I'm separate from you. But what I do to you not only tells you what I believe about life, but tells you what I believe about myself.
And Michael, this is coming up. I
wanted
to close by asking you where people can see you next, and here's the answer.
That's going to be in Flint, Michigan. Looking forward to it. Never been to Flint. That's Michael Moore's neck of the woods. So I'm going to go there, and I'll be speaking. Catherine Martin will be there, and some other speakers who I'm not familiar with.
A dear friend. And
yes, she's a class act.
Yes, she is, and colleague. And Michael, we're coming to the end of our time here. I want to thank you so much.
What a pleasure.
Finally. We will obviously do this again. A giant hug to you, my brother. And
you too, brother. When I'm back in New York, I will give you a call. The first round's on me.
I'll look forward to it. This is Peter Robbins. The show has been Meanwhile Here on Earth. My guest has been Michael J. Carter, Reverend and resident of beautiful, I'm blanking, North Carolina.
North Carolina, yes.
There we go. Join us again next week. If you've enjoyed the show, tell your friends. Stand up for what you believe in. Stay well and be kind to each other.
Yes, please.
Bye for now.